Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Bridge. In this episode, Sam, Kevin, and myself sit down with Martha Wells. We're very appreciative of the time that we had with Martha. We really enjoyed this interview. We hope you do too. Please check out the show notes for a link to Martha's website. You can find out more about her work and the tour she's going on. All right, everyone's waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge.
We're very excited to have Martha Wells here with us today. Martha is a prolific science fiction and fantasy author who has been writing professionally for 30 years. She has won many awards for her work, including a Hugo nomination for her fantasy novel, The Death of the Necromancer in 1998, and the Raksura series in 2018. Many of our listeners are familiar with Martha's Murderbot Diaries series, which won the Hugo Award for Best Series in 2021, along with several Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards for Best Novellas. Her full-length novel, Network Effects, from the Murderbot Diaries series, also won the Hugo in 2021. So yeah, holy macaroni, and that's just some of her literary awards. On May 30th, Martha is releasing her next book, which is a full-length fantasy novel called Witch King. I've had the opportunity to read the first 3 chapters so far, and I'm very excited to read the rest and to talk more about it here today. So, Martha, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So how are things?
Pretty good. Busy.
I'll bet. You're pumping out a lot of stories these days.
Sort of, yeah. I'm mostly working on the next novel right now. It's just I have ended up with 2 new books and 1 revised reprint coming out this year. So it's just been a lot of revisions and copy edits and all that kind of thing. So
the ones that are being released this year are Witch King, and you've also got System Collapse in November.
Yeah, and then a revised version of City of Bones, which was my second novel that originally came out in 1995, and Tor.com is putting that out in September.
Tristan, you're reading that right now, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and it's really getting me more excited about reading fantasy again, which I haven't in a little while, so thank you for that, Martha. But what's the process of reissuing a book like this?
I'm revising the text. It's going to come out, and the publisher decides everything else. Basically, they've decided to put it out in, actually, I don't know if it's hardcover or trade paperback, but it'll also be an ebook. I'm basically reading over the text. It was written, again in 1993, 94. That was a long time ago. And my skill level has changed a lot since then. So I'm, I guess, updating it to my current skill level.
Is that common? I don't know that I've heard about that much before.
It happens occasionally.
Yeah. It's kind of neat to have a do-over.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. It was only the second novel I'd ever written. So, yeah, it was an interesting journey revising it, because it kind of went back to, reminding what was going on in the world when I wrote it, and just what was going on in my life. And so I was kind of trying to preserve that, but still just, touch up the world building and make it more, I don't know. I've learned so much since then.
And now we have a new fantasy book coming out.
I had the opportunity to read the first 3 chapters of Witch King, which, by the way, is available for free for any of our listeners. If you go to Tor.com, you can read the first 3 chapters, and they're exciting. We learn about some of the characters. We get a taste of what's going on with this pain magic, which I kind of want to learn more about. And it looks like a great book. Can you tell us a bit about Witch King?
It's kind of my pandemic book. I hadn't written any fantasy really since 2016, when I finished the Harbors of the Sun, which was the last book in the Book of the Raksura series. And during the pandemic, when it first started, I had writers. Well, I mean, we're still in the pandemic. Actually, I should say 2020, when the lockdown started. I had writer's block for about 6 months. I was trying to work on the Murderbot novel that would eventually become System Collapse, and it just was not getting anywhere. And I kind of keep a writing diary to tell myself, to remind myself what I did that day and how much I wrote and everything. And looking at that, it's just like the same like 1,000 words over and over again. So, and then I was still reading a lot of fantasy and watching Chinese fantasy on Netflix and Viki and just kind of it kind of got my brain moving again, and I just started writing it, and it's basically based on the idea of defeating the evil empire and then living long enough so that the system you created starts to become an empire of its own, and then trying to stop that. And I kind of wanted to do an epic fantasy, but maybe in a shorter form, like an epic fantasy, the good parts version, and only write about the exciting bits I wanted to write about. And so that's kind of part of it too.
So this is a standalone, do you know, or are you going to do?
No, I'm going to try to do a sequel.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually.
Great. Well, that's exciting. And I'm always interested in when fantasy novels, their takes on how magic is done, and it seems like magic in this case, there's no free energy. It comes from somewhere. Can you talk a bit about that, the pain magic?
Well, I've always kind of tried to do that with magic systems where it's not just snapping your fingers and waving your wand and saying abracadabra. In the Ilrian books, I was using ideas about 17th century sorcery and how they thought magic worked. And also the idea of kind of developing, instead of having just a magical artifact that you find that just automatically does stuff, is you have to build one and try to make it work, and they have so that it seemed like that their magic and the way they approached it would work on kind of their version of scientific principles that might not match our science or our version of physics or anything else, but they have a system they're working from. And that to me makes it a lot easier to integrate the magic into the plot, because if I set up rules, I have a lot of rules set up for it that the characters are using, then I can play with those rules, and it makes it kind of easier for me to figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work.
And as the reader, we kind of do that same thing, right? As we're reading through it, we're trying to figure out, okay, so what are the rules of this magic? And I like that as a little mental puzzle as I'm reading through it, trying to figure out, piece together the physics that the author is writing into this.
Because a lot of it's problem solving. And that's kind of what I like about plotting adventure stories, is giving the characters problems and having them solve these problems. It's like, we're trapped here and this is happening, and what do we do? And all that kind of little figuring things out.
If this is true, then this must also be true. And,
yeah.
Right. Got it. And so this, as you were writing this, you mentioned it was a pandemic story to help a bit with the writer's block, maybe. And did it work? Did that help you?
Yeah, it did. It felt really good to be able to write again, because I very much remember those first 6 months and where I just was not getting anything done. And I was doing things like, I was reading and then looking at pictures of houses in Ireland and just weird, just anything to keep my brain occupied, and watching a lot of TV. And when I think it was the copy edit for Fugitive Telemetry, which was the next Murderbot book that was coming out, finally came, and it was just such a relief to have something to work on. And it was like, I've got to get back into writing, because this is I'm just gonna go stir crazy.
And that difference between sci-fi and fantasy for you, does that involve much in the way of changing your headspace, or is it all kind of the same, just different ends of the spectrum?
It's all kind of the same. And I've had people tell me that my fantasy is more like science fiction, which I'm not sure what that means. Exactly.
I was just going to ask you what that means.
But, I don't think I've never written hard science fiction. It's all been, Murderbot gets labeled as that sometimes, but I'm making everything up. I would consider that more like super science or, space opera. So it's just questions of how much technology do the characters have? Do they have a fairly low level of technology? Do they have a high level of technology? It's like in the books of the Raxura, a lot of the civilizations the characters encounter are actually using like biological technology, which may at times seem indistinguishable from magic. So yeah, it doesn't really, I don't really see that much difference. I've always liked science fiction and fantasy. I like reading both and anything in between.
There has to be some fantasy in almost all sci-fi. One suggestion as to maybe why some people might say your fantasy looks like sci-fi is that kind of internal consistency. If this is true, then this is the way the story can go. So like if this is the way the magic is, then these are the ways to problem solve. And like you were talking about before,
yeah.
Similarly, if you've got a sec unit and that sec unit has these capabilities, and can hack it into various things, this is what it's able to do. And maybe there's this internal consistency that seems to make sense.
Yeah, it's like you have to it's kind of like almost writing a mystery novel. To be fair to your readers, you have to, they have to kind of know how the world works a little bit and what's going to be possible and what's not going to be possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Well, it just made me think of Murderbot and the sec unit and the limitations that the sec unit has, but also how it evolves, right? How it, kind of that AI learning piece comes into play. And I really enjoyed how you wrote Murderbot, particularly the action scenes, because every other sort of, I think of like the Terminator, right? It's just like it's singularly focused on Sarah Connor and marching through walls for her. And whereas the action scenes in Murderbot, you get a sense of what actually an AI could do if armed. And it's actually far scarier when the action sort of slows down and you see that Murderbot is looking at 5 different processes that would occupy one human brain, but it is absolutely capable of doing all of those things at the same time. How did you come upon writing that side of the Murderbot and the AI piece, if I can take us in that direction?
Well, it's not easy. I don't do that as much in All Systems Red because they're on that planet and Murderbot kind of has limited resources. So it kind of worked out that way. In Artificial Conditions was where I first started trying to do that. And it was just realizing that in this environment I'd put my character into, it would have access to these different systems. And if I was going to make the story work the way I wanted it to, I had to take all that into account. And that and just trying to make it make it feel more like a real AI that would be able to do these things simultaneously. So that kind of evolved from there, and it just kind of started getting more and more complicated environments. I think probably the most complicated scene I've done probably is when in Network Effect, when Rathi and Arata and Averse they realize they're outside the ship in the little capsule and trying to get in. And Murderbot has sent Amina to do something, and it's ending up having to fight its way through. And it can see what Amina's doing and what the drones are doing in different areas and what you're trying to get the other people inside the ship. And so there's about 5 or 6 different things going on. Plus it's having a fight in person with this other being. And that was a lot. Probably the most complicated I've done it. It's just trying to think like an AI would think as best I can. And it's just, you just kind of have to just kind of decide what all's going on and then kind of layer it in. And yeah, it's just not easy.
I pictured
very tiring.
I pictured this whiteboard of, like how I would have to pictorialize it, I think,
I usually don't use whiteboards. It's just me and Word. A lot of people use different software and everything like Scrivener and stuff like that. And that's never really worked for me. I'm really bad at outlining too. I don't have a lot of luck with outlining. I can't tell if things are going to work in an outline unless I actually do them. I've had to outline for, I did a couple of Stargate Atlantis novels and a Star Wars novel several years ago, and they wanted outlines. And I would come up with action scenes and try to outline them. And then when I would go to write them and be like, this is not going to work. It's just once I can't figure out the moves and all the different, the different technical aspects of whatever setting they're in, and how that's going to affect the characters, unless I'm actually trying to write from the character's point of view at that time. So that's kind of what I have to do with Murderbot. I have to get in there and try to start writing it and think, oh yeah, I forgot this drone. I put that in there. And oh yeah, I forgot this system. And it's like, oh, I need to solve this problem. How would Murderbot solve that? It would try to go into this system and get this to happen and see if that could work. And so, yeah, it's just a lot of thinking.
So if you're not outlining, where's the takeoff point? Like you have your characters and your setting, and you know where they are, and that's your takeoff point?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, getting that first scene and the first line is kind of the important part. If I can get the first line, I can usually get going. And a lot of that is just very kind of writing 101 is starting your story where your story starts. And some stories can have multiple starts. So it's not like an either, there is only one kind of thing, but you just have to find that entry place into the story. And, sometimes that's hard. I had a couple of novels. I think the first book, The Wizard Hunters, I had a lot of trouble trying to find out exactly where to start that book. I think I wrote about 8 chapters in the wrong spot at one point. And then, all those chapters were chapter 1 at some point or another. And so there was a huge amount of revision before I could really get going. But with All Systems Red, I've generally been pretty lucky. With that one, the first scene I actually thought of was when Mensa's knocking on the cubicle wall and talking to Murderbot. And that kind of was the scene that started to really help me get the character. And then I got the first line. I realized I needed to show the thing of how Murderbot ended up hurt. And I got the first line of the story, and then just, then I knew what was going on. With a lot of the others, it's kind of been difficult. I usually end up, like with pretty much all the other novellas and the novel Network Effect, I end up usually writing about 10 to 20,000 words, which in novella, that's more than half the book, and taking that out and rewriting it until I figure out what to do. Artificial Condition, Art wasn't even one of the characters in Artificial Condition when I first started working on it. I had to take out about 20,000 words and go back and redo that when I realized it wasn't working. And I actually had started in the story in the wrong place, and I needed to go back further.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. You've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune into 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
I'm glad you did, because Art is such an endearing character.
Yeah.
I think really,
Yeah.
really made that relationship between the two of them. They're so awkward and standoffish, but it's so there's so little emotion, but it made me cry. It was a great relationship that I thought. Can you talk a bit about Murderbot and how that character has resonated with some of your readers? Have people told you why they love Murderbot so much, as a character?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is because I put a lot of my own issues into it with anxiety and depression and social anxiety, those kind of things. And those things basically represent a whole spectrum of, I don't know if you could call them symptoms, but issues that people have from different things. And so the fact that I was very specific about it let people identify with that and recognize, that this is the same feelings they've had. So I think that's just, there's a commonality there of those kind of feelings for a lot of people.
I agree. And do you think that the pandemic has affected that and made Murderbot even more interesting to readers?
Probably, because I think that a lot of people think of it as a comfort read, I've heard. I think it's just, I don't know, maybe the idea of just wanting to sit and watch TV was something a lot of people felt. It's just like, I want to withdraw from reality. I really need to do it right now. I'm just going to turn on this TV and watch, 12 hours of whatever on Netflix. So
just leave me alone. Let me watch TV. Let me recharge. Like Murderbot's literally doing that when it's going back into its cubby.
Sometimes while doing 12 other things.
Yeah.
Yes. Because escapism, especially when I was growing up, escapism was like, oh no, you're escaping. It was escapism, and I don't know why. And just the fact that I think we're acknowledging a lot more, maybe especially after the pandemic started, that entertainment can be a really necessary thing. To just something that can just take you out of your situation. It can be very necessary for your mental health to just escape into that other world, whether it's a TV show or a book or an audiobook or whatever, just something that gets you away from your own reality for a little bit.
And we have to laugh too. And you've got comedy. You've done a fantastic job at really developing humor in those books, and that's such an important aspect to the escapism we're talking about here.
I think that's kind of the worse things get, the more bitter my sense of humor gets. And I think that in some ways that's reassuring to people, is the fact that it's just things get so bad it's funny. that I don't know, it's just that's kind of a thing you see. It's like it's in reality. So yeah, I think that the humor is just part of how I've always written. So
you talk about putting some of the own symptoms that you see in yourself into that character, and I think a lot of us also see parts of ourselves in that character as well. And I think one of the really interesting parts of it is that you empower that character. This is a super powerful sec unit, and yet this character has all of these concerns that a lot of us also have, but they are super empowered. So this is almost like an introvert empowerment book. and not only that, but the sec unit started out as a slave, and they were able to, without giving too much away, hack a governor module and get to the point of where they are empowered. And I think that story is very compelling.
Yeah, I think that is too. I think that's a large part of it, and that a lot of bad things happen to Murderbot, but it's not overcome by them. It can handle what happens to it, even if it doesn't always think it can. And that's just, I think, sometimes you just need to read that people coping with bad situations. I think that's something that helps too.
And the theme fairly consistently that Murderbot can do a lot on its own. It really needs other characters as well.
Yeah.
Is there a different, or do you have to limit yourself when you're writing Murderbot, like an AI character versus a human character? Like, do you sort of have to build in boundaries for yourself there?
Kind of. One thing is remembering that most of Murderbot's best interactions are with other machine characters, either with other bots or with art or with other systems. And it does interact quite a bit with humans. But like when I was writing Fugitive Telemetry, that kind of, it's out of place. It actually takes place between Exit Strategy and Network Effect. And the reason was because, again, I was trying to go for something, a book that takes place after Network Effect, like System Collapse. But for some reason, I just was having trouble starting it. And so I just started a murder mystery with Murderbot, and then realized, oh yeah, this does fit into the timeline, because there's that scene in Network Effect where it talks about an assassination attempt on Dr. Mensah. And I realized that it's working very well with the station security there. And that story kind of how it met them and how they actually started working together needed to be told. So that was Fugitive Telemetry. And as I was working on it, I was kind of trying to do it like a more classic murder mystery of questioning the suspects, and then realized this was something that Murderbot would be absolutely terrible at, and would probably try anything rather than actually have to do. And so it would be a lot better at things like looking for ways to get data that it could use to solve the mystery, data from the transports that were in dock and that kind of thing. And once I realized that, and that took me back on the path of the mystery. So yeah, I have to kind of remember, it is hard to write because you have to kind of remember not to think like a human. You have to think like a machine. And what the ways that Murderbot gathers information is basically by looking for data that you can put into a database and then run queries on, which is completely different from the way a human goes about gathering information, which is by usually talking to other people, looking for these kind of clues and things like that, and then putting all that together into a narrative as opposed to what Murderbot does.
While reading this, I remember wondering whether you had a computer science background. And I almost wonder if that's why some people have described your work as hard sci-fi. I don't know that I would characterize it that way, but because you are very methodical and thoughtful around those types of things, hacking into security systems, gaining access to certain cameras, what data does Murderbot require to be able to make these decisions? Those are software problems.
Yeah, that's my experience is in software. Long time ago, I used to write COBOL programs, which tells you how long ago it was, and build databases. And I was a system operator for 2 Wang systems, and worked on getting reports for people, and then later worked on building websites and very early on. So my background, it's software and doing computer support for people, do play a lot into Murderbot and how that part of it all works.
I'm not surprised to hear that, honestly, Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did work out well through your writing. So for those who are not familiar with the Murderbot series, it consists of 5 novellas and 1 full novel, soon to be 2 full novels, and they're all available. The new book that's coming out is called System Collapse. You can't tell us too much about it, but can you tell us something about it?
It's coming out on November 14th, and it's set after Network Effect. It's the one I've been trying to write for, since pretty much since I finished Network Effect, and just wouldn't come together for a while. And yeah, it takes off not that long after Network Effect ends. They're still on the planet that they were on in Network Effect.
While we're on it, could you describe a little bit how you came out with the universe that Murderbot lives in? I mean, is this sort of the space where corporations operate with impunity and effectively, in effect, enslave mass numbers of people? And I was sort of thinking about it as I was reading it, it's like, how does any country impact the ethics of a corporation operating in deep space? How do you regulate the Kuiper belt, right? So could you tell us a little bit about that world building and how you set that scene? There's great sort of labor arguments and political arguments attached to that I found really interesting.
The core of the idea was I wanted to write about a character that was completely under control, where they thought it was completely under control and it actually freed itself, but it was going to have to expose that it was free in order to save these people. And trying to figure out the world that would allow that to exist is what led to the corporation rim, and just making it just as terrible as a real corporation, basically. Thinking about the company, which Murderbot will never say the name of, and that is, it's basically an insurance company. And just that, it just kind of evolved very naturally. When you think about who would create a being like this, and who would allow that to happen, and what that would mean to the rest of their society, basically the disregard that would mean for human rights, and the natural extrapolation of that. So that's what that came out of.
Yeah, because to me it seems, particularly like with Elon Musk's of the world and launching their cars into space, it feels like that's probably the most likely outcome, right? Like that there isn't this sort of we lose the nationalization and then therefore the democracy of our nations, spacefaring nations, once it gets turned over to corporate interests.
Yeah, and there's, they can do anything they want. They can almost do anything they want now. It's pretty depressing, and it's really funny to see some people kind of try to react to it and think, well, this is far-fetched, and it's like, okay, these things I actually just took out of the news. There was actually a review, I think, of it's a really short story that was in Wired magazine that was part of a series they did on the future of work, and there were several different authors. They all did a short story, and I did a little Murderbot story, and it was reviewed somewhere, and the person said, "Oh, haven't these people ever heard of unions?" And it's like, that's kind of the point. Yeah, so this is what happens in the future when you don't have unions. You end up, your employer drops you into basically a nuclear engine, and then just doesn't make any attempt to rescue you. So
yeah, you break a strike pretty quickly with an airlock.
when you just when you can do that, nobody will stop you.
Or you could just send in your sec units.
Yeah.
Just to circle back just very quickly, you talked about when with the creation of art, you had to drop 20,000 words, and I couldn't let that go. How, like, that has to be a really difficult decision.
Not really, because if it's not working, it's not working. And if it's not working, I can't go forward. So it's like, if I want to finish the novella, I need to go back and start back where it was. That's kind of when I know a lot of people's methods are different, and they write, and some people plan out very carefully in advance and almost like storyboard the whole thing first. And then some people are like me, and you just kind of strike out and look for the story. I'm looking for the feeling that the story is working. And if I don't, I can write while I don't have that feeling, but sooner or later I'm going to dead end and not be able to continue because it's just not there. And through a lot of trial and error, I've learned what it means is usually I've gone in some wrong direction at some point. And that's, and if I want to do the story I want to do, I need to go back and fix it. And yeah, that can mean and I'll save it and try to use bits of it. And actually, that's one of the most difficult things, is where I'm trying to excavate the good bits of story out of the bad bits and then try to get them in the right order. Yeah, it's just, sometimes you just have to do it.
Can I bring us back just another question on the Murderbot world? You just around the morality of these sec units and the biological brains, and in the corporate sector, how they're basically enslaved. But on Menza's world, there's rights there. They're treated like a sentient entity that can be empowered on their own. And I think that seems natural to us. Those of us who are kind of ethically inclined, we might think, well, if something can think for itself, let's not enslave it, right? And
seems pretty basic, yeah.
It does seem basic, and I worry, as you've sort of alluded in your world building, that people might not see it the same way. But I hate to bring up ChatGPT because it's brought up everywhere, but I feel like I have to, because we anthropomorphize and we associate with things that are human-like, and sec units are human-like. It's got a human brain, and but ChatGPT is trained on humanity and our bodies of knowledge, and it acts human-like. Are we getting close here, Martha? Is this
no, absolutely okay. Not. It's not. What it's doing is regurgitating and remixing conversations it looks for. It's not really I think a lot of people feel like it's like Siri, but better, and that's absolutely not true. Siri is basically like a search engine. You say, what is, how heavy is the earth? And Siri will say, well, the Wikipedia says this. What ChatGPT will do is go out and find conversations that sound like what you said, your keywords, and then smash those together in a way that sounds good, and then give it to you. It's not looking up facts for you. So the answers it gives you are not going to be correct for the most part. It'll just make it sound like a conversation. It's done things like, we'll recommend articles by real authors that don't exist. It will give you false medical information because it's pulling it from different places and putting things together that sound good, that sound like real medical advice. That's incredibly dangerous. It did something, I think it accused someone asked a question about news articles about abuse in, I think, university environments of some kind, and it named a real professor and made up a series of accusations about crimes he had been accused of and convicted of that was all completely fabricated. But it was saying this about a real person. So it's not anything like the AIs or machine intelligences we see in science fiction that are different sorts of sentient beings. It's right now, it's just a really dangerous thing that people can listen to, and it kills them to do things that might get them killed.
You're thinking it's dangerous because the stuff that it says is often untrue, right?
Often untrue. Yeah. It's giving out false information in a way that sounds very plausible.
Truthy.
Yeah. And also it's a lot of the people are using it to write stories, which are basically plagiarism, because it goes out and it scrapes stories off the web and mashes them together, and actual humans wrote those words, and that they're not getting credit for. It's kind of like the Midjourney does with art. Midjourney's not drawing things; it's taking drawings and it's mushing them together, but that's work by original people. That's all like mushed in the mishmash that it does.
So I agree with what you're saying, and an interesting parallel, however, is that the Bing ChatGPT-4 has governing things in it, rules that stop it from being able to continue on conversations, because it keeps state, right? It maintains state up to 20 different back and forths, and then at 20 back and forths, it's essentially rebooted. It's governed from being able to make statements that could be dangerous, or we're trying to control it. And I'm 100% pointing out this is not artificial general intelligence. This is not, but there's some interesting parallels. We're creeping our way here. We're creeping our way towards your world, Martha. We're not there, but there's some interesting parallels.
Yeah.
That sounds like a skeptical well. That sounds like
Well, do you foresee if a future where a sentient type of AI, what does that look like? And do you think do we as a legal system, or does the legal system have to then approach that and give human rights to artificial intelligence of the future, provided that they are in line with the kind of AI that we see in science fiction?
I think they will have. I hope they will have to. Mm-hmm. I hope they will. There's an interesting story by Veena Geomin Prasad that was nominated for a Hugo, I think, a while back, called "The Fandom for Robots," and it's a short story about the first sentient robot that has now become outmoded, basically, and it's stuck in a museum in Tokyo, and the only thing it does is come out for 20 minutes and do a little speech, informational speech to the visitors, and then the rest of the time it's just sitting around because it's been superseded by other models. And it's a good story because it ends up getting online and meeting people and joining a fandom for a TV show about a robot that it likes. But it does make you think of, like, you're creating, if you actually do create a sentient life form, you have to think about, what, you can't just say, well, I'm tired of this one, I'm going to get rid of it, because then that's murder. So yeah, we have to think about all those things. It would be nice if the justice system caught up with that. I mean, it doesn't treat humans so well right now, so it'd be nice if it sort of caught up and before that becomes an issue.
I picture a retirement home for outdated AIs. Some sort of Yeah, I don't know what that would look like, but maybe not much different than our regular retirement home.
Yeah, there's in the Star Trek Lower Decks. There's that prison for the sentient computers that keep trying to take over and become dictators and then kill people, and they're all just little stuck in little boxes screaming at each other, and that's kind of depressing.
And the challenge is going to be, what if and when those sentient AIs aren't human-like? Are we going to be able to identify them as being sentient AIs? We're so stuck in our own self and our own mode of thinking that's going to be tricky for a lot of us, and to empathize with them if they're not human-like.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stories about AIs that want to become human, and it's like that was one thing I was thinking about with Murderbot. What if you have an AI? Why would it want to become human? Look at what it would be giving up in order to become human, and it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It also makes for a difficult sci-fi story to write, because it's hard for the readers to empathize with that character too, eh?
Yeah.
We didn't ask you about what it's been like to win all these awards over the last few years. How has that impacted you in your writing and your publishing?
It's been really incredible. It was not something when you've been published. I first got published in 1993, and the closest I ever came was my third novel, The Death of the Necromancer, got a Nebula nomination, and it was actually added by the jury. And so that was the closest I ever came to an award. And I think that was, after a while, I thought that was probably going to be it. It was hard enough for me at some points just getting another book out, finding a publisher, because I had a career crash after my trilogy, the Ilrian trilogy, and really couldn't sell anything for a couple, 3 years there, and was lucky to get back in with the Cloud Roads when it sold in 2011. And I didn't think awards were in the cards for me. I thought I would be fairly lucky just to kind of stay a working writer for however long my career lasted. So just, the first indication I had that, I knew all systems read from what the publisher was telling me was doing fairly well. It was a shock when I got the Nebula nomination for it. And then there was a bigger shock when it won. And then it made me hope. And then I got the Hugo nomination and then the Hugo win. And it just kind of spiraled from there. So to go from no hope of a Hugo ever to suddenly in a couple of years, 4 Hugos, mm-hmm. It's been a lot. And it's, I'm still kind of just bowled over by it in a lot of ways.
Is it gratifying?
Yeah, really. I mean, it's vindicating, mm-hmm. Because you go through a long career and you have a lot of people who really give you the impression or tell you straight to your face. It's like, well, why are you still writing? Why don't you go do something else? It's like, well, this is the only thing I do really well. So yeah, it's incredibly gratifying and vindicating and to still be here. I mean, there's a lot of people that I wish had got the opportunities and were in the time and room to stick with it. I think that they would be here too. So,
well, any thoughts of retirement are obviously out the window because there's a lot of demand for your stuff. So keep at it, please, Martha.
I'll try.
Well deserved.
Well deserved. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And something else I would like to mention is for our listeners, if we do have listeners out there that would like to meet Martha and see Martha at a signing, go to marthawells.com. You're doing quite the tour here. You're doing signings with John Scalzi, Naaman Novak, and Lucky. So this is fantastic. I wish we could come down to be there. But you're ending your tour at San Diego Comic-Con. Can you tell us about that? Is this something that a lot of authors are doing now more so? And how do you feel about the tour? And
well, I'm really excited about the Comic-Con. I haven't ever been to that one before. I've been to Comic Palooza in Houston 3 or 4 times, which I really enjoyed that. So yeah, that will be really wild. I just overbooked myself when I accepted some convention appearances, particularly Eurocon, which was actually, they asked me 2 years ago, and then I didn't realize Witch King was going to come out in the middle of that. So first I overbooked myself, and then I didn't realize they were going to want me to do the 2 book tours for Witch King and the System Collapse. I didn't know they were going to come out the same year. So it just all kind of snowballed. So I have this huge block of travel there.
Well, Martha, thank you so much for coming by. This has been fantastic. What a great conversation we've had.
Yeah, thank you.
Had some wonderful answers. Really appreciate the discussion.
Oh, thank you. This was fun.
Once again, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Martha Wells. Check out the show notes for a link to Martha's work. We've got more interviews coming up, more episodes coming up, so stick with us. Let us know what you think of the show. Rate the show, review, write in, anything. We'd love to hear from you as usual. Thank you so much, everyone. Until next time.